Hello, I'm Abram Vanningen.
And I'm Joanne Diaz.
And this is Poetry for All.
And today we're delighted to welcome Haleh Liza Gafori. Haleh Liza Gafori has translated a beautiful collection of poems by Rumi titled Gold, which was just published last year by NYRB Press. And today she is going to guide us through Rumi's poem that begins with the first line, Colorless, Nameless, Free. Haleh, would you be willing to read this poem for us?
Of course, I'm happy to. Here is ghazal number 1759. چه بیرنگ و بینشان که منم. کی ببینم مرا چنان که منم. گفتی اسرار در میان آور. کو میان اندر این میان که منم. کی شود این روان من ساکن، این چنین ساکن روان که منم. بحر من غرقه گشتم در خویش، بولجب بحر بیکران که منم. این جهان و آن جهان مرا مطلب، که این دو گم شد در آن جهان که منم. فارغ از سودم و زیان چو عدم، طرفه بی سود و بی زیان که منم. گفتم ای جان تو عین مایی. گفت این چه بود در این عیان که منم. گفتم آنی. بگفت های خموش، در زبان نامده است آن که منم. گفتم اندر زبان چو دن نامد، اینت گویای بی زبان که منم. می شدم در فنا چو مه بی پا، اینت بی پای پادوان که منم. بانگ آمد چه می دوی بنگر، در چنین ظاهر نهان که منم. شمس تبریز را چو دیدم من، نادر بحر و گنج و کان که منم.
And now, can you give us a sense of what this is, what you've done with the translation, Colorless, Nameless, Free?
Sure. And I will say to my Persian friends who might be listening, I know I have a little bit of a Jersey accent.
That's
great.
I was born here, grew up in Jersey. Okay. So here is the translation. Now, one thing I just want to say is that this is a conversation. So you will hear me sort of alter voice slightly, perhaps, or you'll be able to sense the conversation. Colorless, nameless, free. That's what I am. When will I see myself as I am? Put mystery in the middle. Where's the middle in the middle I am? And this silver tongue stream in me, when will it grow still enough to know the streaming stillness I am? The ocean I am, drowned in the ocean I am, shoreless, boundless, wonderful. Don't look for me in this world or that world. Both worlds are lost in the world I am, a luminous void beyond profit and loss. Wonder abounds beyond fear of loss and lust for gain. My soul, you are my true eyes. What are eyes in the invisible visible I am? Then what do I call you? Silence. Words can't name what I am. Then praise the wordless speaker I am. I race through emptiness, footless like the moon. Praise the footless runner I am. Why are you running? To reach me? Settle in the placeless place I am. Settle in the nowhere everywhere I am. The moment I saw Shams of Tabriz, I saw the supreme sea, treasure, and gold mine I am.
Oh, that was great. Oh, my face is already hurting because I just can't stop smiling. Oh, it's so beautiful. It makes me so happy to hear this poem in the original and in your amazing translation, and to hear you perform it with such exuberance, and that's what brings me to Rumi, and of course millions of others who love him so much. And I don't even know where to begin.
Let's start with who Rumi was.
Well, Rumi, first of all, is Jalaluddin Muhammad ibn Hussein Balkhi, aka Maulana, which is what we call him across the Middle East, or Mevlana in Turkey. This word Maulana and Mevlana means our master, our sage. So he was very revered in his lifetime and for the last 800 years. He was born in 1207. So he's had fans for a long time. And Rumi is a name that came after his death. And it means from Rum, which is Anatolia, which is, of course, where present-day Turkey is and where he spent much of his life. But he was actually born in either Balkh or Vakhsh, which is present-day Afghanistan. And since he was writing probably 98% of his poetry in Persian, and there were no national borders back then. He's very clearly a Persian poet. They say that poets belong to languages, not to nations. And there weren't nation states back then anyway. But a lot of nations claim him.
And what was it like for you to translate this and other poems in this collection?
It was an incredibly engaging process. I mean, it kind of sucked me in, and I really thoroughly enjoy it. He says, "Eat my poems like Egyptian bread," and I feel that when you translate, you must eat the poems. And as I've said before, wake with the poems, ride the train with the poems, hike with the poems, and let the sort of messages and images of the poem work through you. I also spent a lot of time reading the poems aloud with my mother. That's been an incredible process. Her grandmother was a storyteller. So some of the backstories that are in Rumi's poems or Maulana's poems, she heard as a child. So it's kind of this intergenerational passing. And it felt like some kind of strange homecoming. It felt incredibly nourishing to be with his poems. I was spending a lot of time working on the book Gold during the pandemic. And I felt very lucky to have this sort of what he often names this shoreless ocean. And I did feel like that, the shoreless ocean being this kind of soul energy or this kind of capacious love, this love, what is it doing to us? It's untying knots when he says, Dar goshayish Adam on ordeha goshud, at the doorway to emptiness, all knots come loose. This emptiness being what? The mystical Persian and Eastern, the Buddhists speak of it too. This emptiness, this space beyond narrative, beyond words, beyond the spinning chatter in the mind when we achieve some kind of silence, perhaps through a meditative practice. Anyway, meeting that and feeling knots untie. It's been a really great experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you have to live with a poet for a long time to translate them, this seems like a pretty good one to live with.
Yeah.
You mentioned this word ghazal that you pass back and forth with your mother. And of course, this is a ghazal. Can you begin to explain to our listeners what is that? What kind of poem is that? What's its form? What's its nature? Where does it come from? What's it doing?
Yeah, a ghazal is a string of couplets. And there is a refrain. So at the end of each couplet, we have a repeated word or phrase. In this one, it's manam, 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 manam. So when I recited the Persian, you may have noticed that the first couplet will repeat the word or phrase at the end of each line. So it's che birang o binashan ke manam, ke bebinam maro chanon ke manam, right? So we have that A. Then we have B-A, C-A, D-A. So then, the next line is Gufti asrar dar miyan avar, کو میان اندر این میان که منم. There it is again.
Yeah.
کی شود این روان من ساکن این چنین ساکن روان که منم. There it is again, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the form. And the idea is that each of these couplets are complete entities within themselves. And in other words, you could pluck one of these couplets out and it could be a little poem. You could pluck 3 out and it could be a poem. And there's a leaping quality between couplets. So we might be talking about in one poem, for instance, the repeating word is laughter. And we might look at laughter from all these different angles and all these different dimensions of laughter. And they're not related. It's not linear. It's not a narrative. It's just, we're going to leap around. And you know, ghazal is etymologically related to gazelle, which leaps. So there's that.
I believe it was Ralph Waldo Emerson, when he first encountered this poetic form, he criticized it for the very thing that you're describing, saying it doesn't connect. It's not cohesive. I think he might have described it as separate pearls on one necklace, right?
Yes.
Yes. But actually, separate pearls on a necklace turn out to be beautiful.
Yes,
and I love when you read the poem to us, you prepared us by saying, you know, you're going to hear my voice shift a bit because there's a dialogue happening here. Could you say more about that dialogue that's unfolding in this poem?
Yes. This poem seems to me very clearly to be a conversation between soul and self. So in Persian, there's this word, and Arabic, there's a word nafs. Nafs is sometimes equated with the ego that we want to shed. But actually, nafs is a sort of spectrum from the constricted, stifled ego to the expansive soul. This, for the Sufi mystics, really expanding beyond the egoic self, nafs ammara, it's called. So it's a specific type of nafs. It's the stifled nafs. This is one of the goals of Sufi mysticism, is to move from greed to generosity. Mm-hmm. And so this poem is a discussion between the soul and the self. And the soul begins by saying, colorless, nameless, free. That's what I am. Now, this namelessness thing is really important, was really important to Rumi. You know, at the end of the ghazals, the typical thing to do is to address yourself. The poet will say, Hafiz, blah, 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 or Attar, blah, blah, blah. It's also a way of signing the poem. Mm-hmm. But Rumi never put his own name. He put Shams of Tabriz, or he put Khamush, which means silence, or he put al-Dīn, one of his other friends. So the idea was he wanted to actually experience the state of binomi, namelessness. Mm. He felt, because also he was very famous, you know, he was a famous preacher before he became a poet. And so he wanted to sort of put that aside around the age of 38 when Shams of Tabriz came into his life and said, hey, come with me. Rumi thought, let me walk this talk now. Mm-hmm. Let me put this big turban, which was a sign of prestige, and this robe aside, and the fame aside. And he stopped preaching. He passed that baton on and went into these samma, deep listening gatherings. And that's when he started to write poetry, specifically when Shams left town. His first ghazals were love letters to Shams calling him back. Mm. So this throwing dogma to the side and embracing bewilderment, embracing the question mark, is very central to this philosophy. Put mystery in the middle carries the philosophy of this Sufism.
What you're saying really helps me understand how Sufism informs his poetics and his whole way of being. And, you know, as I hear you talking, you know, I'm looking at, there's one line that each time I've read your translation of this poem, this passage really stays with me. Don't look for me in this world or that world. Yes. Both worlds are lost in the world I am, a luminous void beyond profit and loss. Wonder abounds beyond fear of loss and lust for gain. And I'm like, oh my God. And I don't know, I know I'm not the first person to say this probably, but I can't help but think of Walt Whitman, right? If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean. Yeah. But I shall be good health to you nevertheless and filter and fiber your blood, you know?
So beautiful, yes.
And I would love those two guys to have a conversation together.
Me too. They would have been great friends.
Yeah.
Great friends.
Because of that openness and that desire for connection, for love, beyond the limits that we often impose in this world.
Yes.
Right?
I grew up hearing my father recite this poetry while we lived in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And we lived in an apartment building. And I was looking out on the Hudson River. And, one of the first heartbreaks of my life was knowing how polluted this river was. 1.3 pounds of PCBs was dumped into this river. Why? Because of profit and the bottom line, because it was more expensive to be responsible and, dispose of these wastes in a responsible manner. So seeing ourselves as interconnected, seeing ourselves as part of a whole, and caring for each other. This is so central to mysticism.
There is the content of this poetry, which is calling us to a kind of mysticism and expressing it in a certain kind of way. But then you, as a translator, also have to carry over some of the music of the poetry. So when I look at these lines that we've just been talking about, for example, I'm hearing the L's come back, right? Lost, luminous, lost, lust. I'm hearing a kind of rhythm and repetition. Both worlds are lost in the world I am, a luminous void beyond profit and loss. Wonder abounds beyond fear of loss and lust for gain. I mean, they're beautiful lines. And so I wonder how you navigate as a translator. Are you carrying over a certain music that you hear? Are you carrying over alliteration that you hear? Are you carrying over repetition? What are you trying to do to make the music speak the mysticism?
Sometimes it is possible to recreate or mimic the wordplay in the translation. For instance, if we look at this couplet, Ke shavad in ravan man saken, in chonin saken ravan ke manam. You can hear the words ravan, saken, and then saken ravan. So Ravan means flowing, streaming, like a river. It also means fluent or silver-tongued, which of course Rumi was, very eloquent and very talkative. And Saken means quiet, still. So in the couplet, he's using these words in different places, of course, in the sentences. And so here it is in English. And this silver-tongued stream in me, when will it grow still enough to know the streaming stillness I am? So you hear the double stream streaming and still stillness.
I mean, one of the things that struck me from something you were saying earlier about the namelessness of this soul and trying to get away from the ego is if this is a conversation between soul and self, there are all these moments when the self keeps trying to pin down the soul, right? My soul, you are my true eyes. And then the soul responds, what are eyes in the invisible, visible I am? And then the self says, okay, fine. Then what do I call you? And the soul says, silence. Words can't name what I am. Sometimes we talk about poets knowing the limits of language more than almost any other kind of user of language. Because they work with words as their medium, they know the limits of those words and what they cannot capture. And when then you get a poet like Rumi, who's especially dwelling in that reality because of the sort of mystical experience. And what do we get but a whole bunch of words that are essentially generated by the desire to name and experience a kind of silence.
Yeah, he's trying to usher us into wordlessness with words, right? He's using words to usher us into wordlessness. That's very true, very true. And that's one of the reasons that he ends so many of his poems with khamush, which means basically turn off. It means turn it off. Turn off the tongue, turn off the mind, silence.
Silence, yes. Opening, yes. But also movement and connection. So it feels like it's a both and, where in some poems it's turn off, the ego, turn off all of the ways that you want to limit yourself. But elsewhere, he's asking for connection, engagement, whirling action, right? And so I'm thinking of whirling dervishes, of course, and Sama, which, of course, Shams of Tabriz introduced him to. It wasn't a part of his life until midlife, and that became a part of his poetic practice. and is a tradition that continues to this day, right? Whirling dervishes, they are like a UNESCO World Heritage. That's a protected practice where like it's acknowledged as this culturally significant. And if you watch the dance of the whirling dervish, one hand is facing down toward earth, the other is facing up toward heaven, right? And that movement of just the idea of the circle of the movement of the body just going and going, and that could get you into a meditative state. So yes to silence, but also yes to movement and thinking about the body. How do you think about all that?
Yes, well, I think that movement, that is in a way a demanding meditative practice, only in the sense that it involves motor coordination, a movement, a repetitive movement, and it requires a focus. And when I've successfully whirled, meaning for longer than 5 minutes, it's when I get very, very peaceful. You drop into this place and then you could whirl for hours. It asks you, it invites you into silence. You can only really do it if you sort of calm down, it seems to me, for that long. He then became what he would say a conduit. And he started to hear the booming voice of the heavens, the roar of fate, the ruckus the muse makes. In this state of whirling and the silent mind, the poetry started coming through, and sometimes he was spontaneously composing while whirling.
You spoke earlier about how a lot of poets in a ghazal would put their own name at the very end, and Rumi does not do that. Instead, he puts somebody else's name. But what is the function of that last stanza, and how does it work? We still get the repetition, we still get the refrain, we still end the whole poem on I am, but we seem to shift. If we have this dialogue between soul and self, then suddenly at the very end we get this: the moment I saw Shams of Tabriz, I saw the supreme sea, treasure, and gold mine I am.
This is the moment when soul and self are coming together. And this is the moment of integration where, I am all of these things, and I will, slip back and forth between, soul and ego, while hopefully moving towards soul more and more and more, becoming more and more expansive as my life goes on. In this moment of allowing ourselves both to be the idiosyncratic self that we are and the soul energy, which is the unified, interconnected energy that we are. In this moment when we see both and we allow one to inform the other, and we allow the soul energy to come into the self and really sort of support it, we then have access to the gold mine within us.
And that Shams of Tabriz, again, that friendship that they had, and the ways that Shams challenged Rumi to re-see the world in a whole other way.
Yes.
I love that he acknowledges that connection and that debt, and just how transformative that was for him. So I love how the poem reaches beyond just one speaker, and it really relies on Shams being there at the conclusion of the poem. That's beautiful.
Yes. And Shams was in a way his portal to the divine, and I think Beatrice was a kind of window into the divine for Dante. But this kind of love between two human beings sometimes opens us to the divine energy. And when that person is so connected to something that we feel is so important to us and so beautiful and expansive, it's like, you are the doorway to the sun, he tells Shams. You are my portal to revelation. So the friend there, the human friend, bringing us to the divine, is really important. There is a line in there that I think is worth mentioning too, since we were looking at some of the lines. When the soul says, as Abram, you mentioned, words can't name what I am. And then the self comes back and says, then praise the wordless speaker I am. It's kind of like, I got this. Okay, I got it. I get it. And then it says, and also, praise the footless runner I am. I race through emptiness, footless like the moon. This is so funny. I think there's such an element of comedy there and
Yeah.
adorableness of the self, this, just sort of wanting to say, oh, look at me, look what I've accomplished. And then the soul answers, why are you running? To reach me? Nah, settle in the placeless place I am. Settle in the nowhere, everywhere I am.
I love that. I love that back and forth. And also just this sense that humor too could be a part of mysticism, because sometimes we think of mysticism as so weighty and ponderous and significant, and you have to enter into the spirit of it and so on. And here you get this humorless back. Oh, I'm racing without feet to meet you. And why are you even running?
Settle down.
Now.
And actually you bring up a very important point regarding laughter, because there are poems dedicated to laughter, and laughter is it. We know we've finally got this when we're laughing, I think, because that's when the knots have untied.
With all that we've learned, would you be willing to read this poem for us once again?
Here is ghazal number 1759 by Maulana Rumi. آه چه بیرنگ و بینشان که منم، کی ببینم مرا چنان که منم. گفتی اسرار در میان آور، کو میان اندر این میان که منم. کی شود این روان من ساکن، این چنین ساکن روان که منم. بحر من غرقه گشت هم در خویش، بوالعجب بحر بیکران که منم. این جهان و آن جهان مرا مطلب، که این دو گم شد در آن جهان که منم. فارغ از سودم و زیان چو عدم، طرف بی سود و بی زیان که منم. گفتم ای جان تو عین مایی، گفت این چه بود در این عیان که منم. گفتم آنی به گفتهای خموش، در زبان نامده است آن که منم. گفتم اندر زبان چو در نامد، اینت گویای بی زبان که منم. می شدم در فنا چو مه بی پا، اینت بی پای پادوان که منم. بانگ آمد چه می دوی بنگر، در چنین ظاهر نهان که منم. شمس تبریز را چو دیدم من، نادر بحر و گنج و کان که منم. Okay, and the English. Said the soul, colorless, nameless, free. That's what I am. When will I see myself as I am? Put mystery in the middle. Where is the middle in the middle I am? And this silver tongue stream in me, when will it grow still enough to know the streaming stillness I am? The ocean I am, drowned in the ocean I am. Shoreless, boundless, wonderful. Don't look for me in this world or that world. Both worlds are lost in the world I am. A luminous void beyond profit and loss. Wonder abounds beyond fear of loss and lust for gain. My soul, you are my true eyes. What are eyes in the invisible, visible I am? Then what do I call you? Silence. Words can't name what I am. Then praise the wordless speaker I am. I race through emptiness, footless like the moon. Praise the footless runner I am. Why are you running? To reach me? Settle in the placeless place I am. Settle in the nowhere, everywhere I am. The moment I saw Shams of Tabriz, I saw the supreme sea, treasure, and gold mine I am.
Amazing. Yeah.
So good.
Thank you, Haleh, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your interest in this, and I enjoyed myself very much.
To learn more about Rumi, you can visit our website at poetryforall.fireside.fm, and you can find Haleh Liza Gafori's translations of Rumi's poetry into English in Gold, published by the New York Review of Books, and you can visit her website at halehliza.com. That's HALEHLIZA.com.
And please remember to subscribe to Poetry for All wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you for listening.